Hey everybody, Mo Bundle here, your host at Real Relationships, Real Revenue. Really cool insights coming today in the episodes from Trey Taylor. Trey Taylor, not Trey Trailer. I had a friend in college.
I'll take it. That's not bad, Mo. I don't mind that.
Alliteration. So Trey is got a super interesting perspective, audience. Not only is he a CEO, he runs a family office. He's on boards, he invests in companies, he buys and sells, and he's written an amazing book called, let me get this in here, A CEO Only Does Three Things. And I think that's quite provocative. So Trey, why don't you drop us right into why you wrote the book, why somebody runs a business and only does the things that uniquely that they should be doing, makes a big difference, frees up time. And then if you can, and I can guide you through this too, everybody, audience members, everybody on the show, you're in effect, metaphorically, you're a CEO. You're running a book of business. You're running big client relationships. You're building relationships that are going to help a team thrive. You're a practice leader, a team leader. You've got some type of leadership, at least at the client level, and probably bigger than that, if you're watching or listening, that you are going to be able to learn a lot from Trey and his provocative perspective on what leaders should do. So Trey, over to you.
Yeah, a ton to unpack there, Mo. I appreciate the question. So as far as like the origin story, I grew up in a family that we were entrepreneurial, and my grandfather had started our family business, which is an insurance, financial planning, sort of brokerage business. And that business has been around about 58 years. So I'm the third generation sort of running that business. And I got into that business in a bit of the backdoor roundabout way. So my dad had always told me, like, don't do what we do for a living. You're always dependent on the client, and you shouldn't do that. It's a very second generation thing also to take the third generation and send them down the professional track. So I went to law school at Tulane, really hated every moment of the study, but really enjoyed the problem solving and the hacking that sort of became, it was more the way they structure your brain to think than it was the material that you were learning. And so I really enjoyed that. And, I was doing some clerkships in the summer, and I got hired by a guy who then left and went to a company that no one had heard of, but became WebMD. So when he got there, he called me, and I was in my third year of law school, and he said, hey, why don't you come work for me at WebMD? I don't have a law clerk. I need somebody to help me out. What are you talking about? I go to law school in New Orleans. You're in Atlanta. And he's like, just transfer and make it happen. So I did do that. And that sort of launched me into a career of venture capital, early stage investing. We would do a deal on Thursday, and then like Friday morning, it would be front page of the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or something of that nature. And so it was a really good sort of graduate education in corporate development, business development, venture capital, and those kinds of things. So that became my passion and my trajectory. I left that company to start a venture fund. We made 11 investments, one of which I still get dividend checks from, and the other 10 all reached successful exit. So it was an incredible track record. And so my life was headed along those lines. I took a job after 9/11 when venture capital basically disappeared from the Southeast. I took a job at Earthlink, which was an ISP, and we revamped their sort of product development strategy by interfacing with my contacts in venture capital. So I was taking these skills and sort of applying them in weird places. A friend of mine at Earthlink got hired at AOL, and the CEO of AOL said to him, we need to find somebody to divest from all these companies that we bought, and we need to raise $1 billion because we're not doing anything with these companies. And they owned like the HuffPo, Movie Phone, all kinds of like weird random things that they should have put together, but they never did the integration work. So I took that job, and as I was standing out in front of my house when the movers had just called and said they're coming to get my stuff to move me to Virginia, my mom called and said, hey, we're in Vegas. And I had known that they had gone at the end of the year to see some family and enjoy some nightlife. And she said, your dad's in the hospital and it doesn't look good. And I said, oh, okay, well, keep me informed. I'm waiting on the movers. And she said, no, you don't understand. You need to be here if you're going to say goodbye. Mm. So my brother and I, ran to the airport, went to Vegas, and brought my dad home, not in the way that we wanted to bring him home, but basically, he had passed away. And interestingly now, he passed from COVID in 2005. They didn't call it COVID back then. They called it SARS-2 complex. And so we had dealt with what so many families had dealt with in the past couple of years about, 15, 20 years ago. So then, my dad was 52 years old. We had no succession plan in the business. The succession plan was for him to live to be really old and somebody else to take it over. And that didn't happen. And so I found myself on the first day that I decided that I had to stay. So I had to call my boss at AOL and say, I'm not taking the job. Can I have my furniture back? And I owed him money because they had given me a signing bonus and all of that. And I'm standing in a business that I'm not supposed to be in, that I have no affinity for, that I have no passion towards. And it's a commitment of obligation, not of affirmation. And so it was a lot of head trash for me for many years to stand there. But the first thing I did after I announced that I was taking over was close the door and literally Google, how do you be a CEO? And I was very unsatisfied by the answers that I had received there. So what I began to realize was that CEO is the only position that doesn't have a job description in the business. So and to your point earlier, we could talk about CEOs, and that's the focus of my work, but you can also generalize it into leaders as well. So, you may have a job description for your, VP of product development or, your director of logistics or something of that nature. But inside that job description, do you tell them how to lead the organization that they are on top of? And so after several years of me taking notes as I learned lessons, most of which were mistakes that I had made, I began to sort of synthesize those things and figured out that one of my favorite VCs had nailed it when I had met him once before. And he told the story of having to fire the CEO of one of their portfolio companies, which is a remarkably hard thing to do. And in doing that, he looked at the chairman of the board and said, I need to hire a CEO, but I don't know what they do. And the chairman said, oh, that's easy. They hire the right people. They keep enough money in the bank. And, they build a culture or a workplace where people want to come and do excellent work. So I said, okay, that's culture, people, and numbers. And so I wrote my book at the request of many consulting clients that say, I love what you're saying. Do you have a book? I finally put it into a book. But my early intentions were simply to have a document that I could pass on to the person that took over from me, So we wrote the book, CEO Only Does Three Things. CEOs often look at that and say, yeah, right. I wish I only did three things. But my argument is before you touch anything else, you should make sure that you're making a contribution to the culture in a positive way, that you're making a contribution in either recruiting or retaining staff members, the people on the journey with you. And you should check in with your numbers to make sure you're making the correct progress against them or to make course corrections along the way. And so I think that also holds true for anybody in a position of leadership. Those should be the first three things in the miracle morning every morning when you sit down and say, let me address my business, my work life. Those are the things that we should jump off on.
Well, this is brilliant. And when I read your personal story in the book, we had met, but I hadn't heard that before. And I read it in the book. I'm like, it just stopped me in my tracks. I was in the kitchen and the book had arrived and I was digging in your personal stories in the beginning. I mean, you call it my story. So I was like, oh yeah, what's Trey's story? This will be fun. Well, that beginning part is not fun.
It wasn't fun to live through. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just, it struck me right away. And I think what's interesting about your background for the audience, popping up a level and speaking to them, is a lot of people who write CEO books haven't been CEOs. Or, they've only got a research side, or maybe they've been a CEO of one organization, but not many. And I think what's interesting about what Trey can teach us today is you've seen all sides. You've been on boards, you've bought and sold companies, you have consulting relationships where you help CEOs do the right things, been one yourself. So you have this total 360-degree perspective. And I think our audience just doesn't get this content very much. So think of a senior account manager that leads 20 relationships for a big healthcare company, a lawyer that's a team leader within the broader litigation practice, which might have hundreds and hundreds of partners, but they lead a very specific subspecialty. Just as two examples, these things are really important. So why don't we dig into each one in order? Culture, people, numbers. and you teach the audience like, hey, if you had to focus on one big thing around each, what should it be?
Yeah,
Does that sound good?
for sure.
Let's hit
Does. And
culture.
I think knowing your audience, like you've presented them to me, it also brings up an interesting concept to me, which is we study leadership a lot, right? All of us know that the way to advance our careers is to study leadership, develop our leadership skills. Let me work on my IQ. Let me work on my EQ. Let me go to these offsite trainings and that kind of stuff, all of which are valuable. I believe in it. We have a principle in one of our businesses that 20% of the EBITDA is available for training in the next year. So people, and that can be university based and all of that sort of thing. So I believe in it. Here's what I think we should be studying. Unless you are the top of that organization, maybe we should study followship a little bit. How do I be a good follower? How do I help those above me achieve their results? And so the hack here, I think, is, first of all, you have to know what they're trying to accomplish. And I'm here to tell you that CEOs properly tasked should be working on the culture, the people, and the numbers of the organization. We'll talk through those in detail. So I just want to throw that out there as something that I like people to think about, is instead of getting up every day and saying, how can I be a good leader, which is a good question, because you are leading some people. The second follow-on question should be, how can I be a good follower today too? Or teammate or helper or whatever phrase makes it psychologically palatable. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And just to jump in, Trey, I think for the audience, what's interesting about that is we can apply that above the organization, and those are the same skills we can apply to clients too. How can we help those clients achieve their goals? If you're watching this podcast, if you've sort of devoured some of these 550 or whatever episodes we got up there as Trey and I tape, you know that we're all about helping others accomplish their goals. Wins for every conversation is about how does everybody win a little bit more. And one thing I don't think we've ever covered on the show, Trey, is we've always applied those skills with clients, but those same skills go for your boss, everybody. So I think that broadens the context a little bit, more impact.
That concept of managing upwards. My best and favorite team members are the ones that show up for me and say, you don't know about this, but I've done the work. I've driven it to this decision. I don't have the authority to make that decision. You do. If you agree with the way that I got there, this is my recommendation. Can we go forward? Which is very different than somebody coming in and saying, shuffling their feet and saying, well, I think we have a problem. I'm interested in that's adding to my to-do list. And I trade my to-do list for your paycheck, right? So like if I'm hearing that from you, you're not fully doing your job. And that managing upwards, those are the people that you continue to promote and protect in your organization.
I like this a lot. Okay. So that was super cool concept or context. Let's drop into culture. What should people focus on?
So, what is culture? Let's go definitional right off the bat. I'm a word nerd to some extent sometimes, and I love studying the origins of words and things like that. And so the etymology of the word culture is the same as the etymology of the word cultivate. So it is the garden that you're tending effectively. And in a garden, be that a food garden or just a beautiful, flower garden, what's the job there? It's not only to plant the things that you want to take out of it, but it's to keep the bad things at bay as well. So you weed the garden, you keep the animals out by building a fence around it. If some of the plants are not behaving or get disease, you have to take them out and physically remove them from the space. You have to give everything room enough to flourish. I mean, it's a perfect metaphor for what we do as leaders and CEOs when we focus on culture. So culture is rooted in the idea that our values become our behaviors. That is what culture is. It's the expression of our values through the behaviors of our people. And here's the great thing. Leaders know this. If you have a great culture, it by definition means you don't have to be looking over the shoulders of all of your people to check their actions to make sure that they represent their values. And when you've worked in a powerful culture, you know that that's the case. When you haven't, which we call the lowest common denominator culture, and that culture comes from a lack of clarity on what our values are, but a lowest common denominator culture benefits the individual at the expense of the group. A highly articulated culture benefits the individuals in addition to the group as a group dynamic. So highly articulated means what? It means you need to write your values down. You need to ritualize them in a way that can be shared and transferred generation to generation, new person, coming into an established business, those kinds of things. And you need to have everybody with the ability to use the values to determine the proper next step. That's a highly articulated culture.
Yeah.
I use the analogy, Mo, I think you know this, but of the parking lot, right? If I have a parking lot in a commercial building and I don't go take care of that parking lot, eventually the weeds sprout up and the weeds eventually break up the concrete over periods of time. And most businesses that I consult with that are sort of 20 or 30 years, they aren't being very intentional with their culture. They aren't articulating it and sharing it every day with their people.
Yeah. I love these metaphors because they bring it home. The idea that a weed can break concrete over time is really powerful if it's not pulled. It reminded me of some rhyming. I love the rhyming of word nerd, by the way. I'm going to adopt that because I am too. A client in our session once, and it was a different context. They were doing some work around some personal planning, but they used the words weed, seed, and feed. That's somebody they wanted to do. Does that fit with the garden metaphor?
Yeah. It fits so well that I'll steal it. Yeah.
You should. Well, I'm stealing it from him.
That's a really good thing. Yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about in culture, that you need to weed to make sure that the things that could become dangerous, aren't dangerous to the whole. You need to seed, meaning recruit the right people into it and make sure that they are well taken care of by feeding them. Yep. Yeah, really good. I've jotted it down already.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we'll help each other with words. So yeah, I think that's super interesting. And if we apply it to like a team leader, whether that's somebody account manager for a big client organization, they could have dozens or hundreds of folks that report to them, somebody that's a team leader in a very specific practice area or a geography or whatever. This idea of defining the culture is really important. I was working with a major consulting firm and they're spinning up a new practice, some kind of work they've done before, but it's been a bit ad hoc. They haven't professionalized it and systematized it to a way. Flew out to Park City, and the gal who runs a third of the world for that practice area, it was striking to me because she's really, really good. And she spent a full half day. Now, these are some of the busiest high-end professionals in the world. She spent a full half day where we led a little workshop on how people think and everybody got an assessment, but that was only like an hour. Then they took another 3 hours, and through that framework of how people thought and the strengths and the weaknesses of those thinking styles on the team, or what they might over and under index to is another way to say it. They spent 3 hours defining their values just on their team. And most of her peers, I don't think would do that because they would say, oh, we don't have time for that. But
we don't have time for it, or it's not my job, right? We hear that.
Oh, yeah.
As well.
Yeah. This is the whole company. I don't control the whole company's culture. They have 40,000 employees or whatever and partners. But she figured out the part of the organization she ran. And now that we're several months after that, the feedback that I keep hearing, that team is operating at a level that's rarely seen even in their hyper-efficient world, because they all are bonded in a way that they couldn't anticipate, or most don't do. So anyway, comment on that.
And they're pulling the same wagon, aren't they?
Yes.
Instead of each of them sort of having a small wagon, a tow behind or something like that, they're all behind the big, whatever the big mission she defined or the organization defined for them. They're all pulling the same thing, the same direction. And that's why they achieve more than anybody else, because everybody else has that centrifugal force where you're pulling the wagon forward, but we're all pulling it in a different direction. And so the speed and the ability to transport is just lowered in that kind of organization.
Yeah. And just as an inspirational story to the audience, that she's having so much success, now other people are coming to say, how are you doing the thing you're doing? It's bubbled up above to the global practice area. Now they want to do that same exercise. Other teams want to do that same exercise. Now she's doing that exercise for clients. So like, it's really cool when you do this the right way. The results take care of themselves and everybody notices. So you can have even a bigger impact than just the part of the world you think that you impact. So that's culture. Any follow-up on culture before we go to people?
No, so culture starts with the definition of values, and then you ritualize those values in some way. So, for example, in our organization, every Monday, we have 13 Beatitudes. We have 13 because I can repeat those values 4 times in a 52-week year. So we review our values on a weekly basis 4 different times through the year. So week 1, we start with be client focused. And then what we do is somebody reports, they read the value on our weekly call. They go through and they say, here's a story of when I have seen someone else in the organization exhibit or behave in the manner consistent with this value. So they're catching somebody doing something right. And that I can't tell you the value that creates. Number one, we have an entire internal myth and narrative about how we are client focused, how we tell the truth, how we are abundance minded, how we are intrepid, how we are all of those things. So somebody coming in knows that. We hired a new person in February to join the team. And every week she's writing these stories down because it's the first time she's ever heard it. But the rest of us have heard them 100 times, and it becomes a myth of the company. So you got to ritualize those beliefs as well. And then you absolutely have to hold people accountable and be held accountable against the values. And the way that you do that is every single planning session, everything at all, you make time to visit the values. So there have been times that we wanted to do projects, but just could not connect the project to enough of our values that we had to sort of say, we know we can get this started. We're not sure that we would finish it in the way that we would want it to look like, because from a values basis, it isn't satisfying enough for us. That's a hard conversation to have internally. But then when you have to tell a partner that, this thing just doesn't satisfy our values enough, it's difficult as well. But that's the application of culture. Make sure it shows up in behaviors of your people, ritualize that to catch them doing something right, and then use it to analyze future action.
Yeah, that is amazing. Yeah, I've got a bunch I want to cover, but I know for time I'm going to skip over it. But I think I've missed ritualizing things within Big. So I'm covering this as a big takeaway.
Yeah, yep. It's a thing that feels uncomfortable, quite honestly, the first time you do it. Am I starting a cult here? Am I pontificating? What if, this is what goes through people's minds, what if I've chosen the wrong values and my people look at me and say, you're a hypocrite, you don't live these values? Yeah. All of those kinds of things will pop up. Those specters will pop up to prevent you from getting there. The first year, I did it all myself. I didn't ask anybody else to share. I went around and caught people doing right. I told them the stories from my father's generation and my grandfather's generation of the company that I had heard as a kid growing up. And the most interesting thing at all to me, Mo, is we lost my grandfather who founded the company in February of this year. And in giving his eulogy, I was absolutely stunned by how right we had gotten it in our Beatitudes, because they were the values that he had lived his life by, run his business in. Yeah. And more importantly, 2 new team members had come up to me after the service and said, all these stories that we've heard of your grandfather today, they really fit in with what we think we know about ourselves. So I thought it was very interesting that it played that way.
So the genesis was right, but then the ritualization and was right too. Just a quick story. I remember I got the team together. We did an annual planning session. I guess it would have been like a year and a half ago. And we defined our values. And it was really powerful. We came up with a word that said growth, GROWTH. Go-getter. We're go-getters. We're reliable. We get things done. We're otherish is the O. That's a steal from Adam Grant. I've heard him say it. It's like the opposite of selfish. It's give first, things like that. I just love the unique nature of the word otherish too. We cheated with W because we used an adjective or an adverb, wildly optimistic, which I really like. Team players is T and H is humble. So that was our growth. Well, at one point, we went through that exercise. Everybody loved it. It was super fun. And then at one point, 9 months later, I mentioned, oh, wow, that hits our values. That's blank. Well, the optimistic or whatever. And the person I was talking to on the team said, oh, I forgot we did that. And that's when a light bulb went off oh, I need to reinforce these a lot more than I am. So I think the ritualization is really important. That's the part I think I've missed. And I'm going to commit to doing that.
It's really good. And one of the things that always happens with our clients, happen to us as well, is the conversation eventually will break out that says, are we doing this as well as we pat ourselves on the back for doing it?
Yeah.
And we've made a substantial personnel change in the business and organizational change in the business because of one of those conversations. So having them written down is not enough. Enron had their values written down. They were engraved
good
in
point.
gold letters on the marble wall, right?
Yeah.
But you went around that corner into the first conference room and you didn't see those values again.
Yeah.
So writing them down is not the only assignment. You absolutely have to be out there talking about them more than you feel comfortable with up front. And then you will be surprised. Everyone is always surprised by how thirsty people are to be grounded in purpose.
Yeah, and I love that line. Before we go to people, you want to talk about this more than you're comfortable.
Yeah, it's an uncomfortable thing to be preaching to people about how we should act and behave when you are used to driving people towards the achievement of goals.
Yeah.
It's a softer, it requires a higher level of self-confidence, and nobody has that going into it. This is the thing that turns CEOs' stomachs more than anything. All of my clients, this is the hard part. The first hard part is defining what your values are, which means defining what your values are not.
Yeah.
And that's always the fun part of the process when I'm working with the values articulation process is working with CEOs to say, who would you not be no matter what? And they'll say, oh, I would never be the guy that does this or this or this, or I'd never be the gal that wants this instead of this. That's a good process to start with, but getting those values in, that's hard enough. But then having to go out and talk about those values and say, I know that we're not 100% excellent at this, but it's still good enough that this is who we want to be. Because all of this is identity-based thinking. It's not intellectual. It's not emotional. It's identity-based thinking.
I love it. All right. I could go on and on and on about this one and ask you 1,000 follow-up questions, but we got to get to 2 more. So let's drop into people.
Yeah, we got more to do.
Yeah.
So people is a little simpler conceptually because you got to have people to do the work. Chat GPT 4 is not even there yet, right? We got to have people to do the work. And if we have to spend time with people, should they be excellent people that we hate spending time with? Or should they be crappy people that we love spending time with? Well, that is the tension answer, right? That's what everybody's going through every time they hire, that sort of thing, because you do need and want to enjoy and feel productive with and self-actualize using the people that you surround yourself with. So these are the people that are on the same journey as we are. And what it begins to do, if we're talking recruiting, is completely change the way that you recruit people. So, in our businesses, we used to, we'll hire 5 and see how many make it, that sort of stuff. The very first conversation we had is, here's the job description. How can you be the person to do the job the best? Why should I hire you and not someone else? The next conversation was compensation, where the dynamic shifts to the other side of the room. How much are you going to pay me when I do all of that kind of stuff? Entirely unproductive. So we flipped our interview process completely around. So when I think of people, I think of how do you recruit them and how do you retain them? And should you retain them? So in the recruiting process, we have an interview where we talk culture and culture only. I give them the 6 reasons they don't want to work at my company, and they are cultural reasons. So 2 of those things I'll change any day of the week for anybody: compensation, work environment, those kinds of things. Perfectly willing to change those things to suit an individual. The other 4 things we won't change at all, because then we wouldn't be the person, the people that we want to be, the organization that we want to be. So in recruiting people, we talk culture, then we talk capabilities. That's when we say, here's the job and what it would require you to do, and can you do the job? And we run our various assessments in that phase. People like their assessments, so we run those in that phase. Then we talk compensation, which is very different. And then the 4th meeting, and these can be, a couple of interviews, they can be 4 meetings, they can be 8 meetings if necessary. In the last meeting, it's the commitment phase. And what we do is we go through and say, look, here's all that we've talked about, and this is what I promise you I'm going to do for you. And I want you to promise me that you will do these things for me. And we talk about things like, we're going to get into business in the right way, which means you're going to be trained. You're going to be supported. I'm going to invest hard dollars in you that I can't invest other places. I'm going to be here for you 24/7. So you call my cell number at any point. I'm going to assign a manager who has my management philosophy of bringing things out of you. All of those things we're going to do. I need you to do these things, whatever the position is. And then I want a commitment from you that if things don't work out, we're going to get out of business with each other in the right way. So we're not going to kick dirt. We're not going to have it be personal. We're not going to damage each other. We're going to shake hands and say, this was an experiment that did not work. And that has smoothed over so many exits from the organization from me. Not that we have a lot, but that smoothed over those. It's recast, it's reframed. How do I talk about quitting or getting fired? Because it's a different thing. Okay, so that's recruiting.
Yep.
Now you've got them. What do you do with them? And I see CEOs miss the mark on this all the time. So many of us hire people and say, well, I got them now. I'm just going to beat them up and work them to death. And I'm going to get my money out of it. And I want them working at their full potential, which really just means what I expected it to be, not that I independently assess. How do I get the most out of my people? And of course, I want that as well. I don't want to, I'm not pre-Elon Twitter where everybody can come have Mai Tais for work and that kind of stuff. I mean, we work when we go to work. And so I want that to be the case all the time. But what I have realized is the less I input and the more I encourage, the better results are produced. So when I come in and say to somebody, here's how I want this done and this done and this done and this done, and I should have hired the right person that's creative in figuring those things out, I very typically will get something that's about 75 to 85% of the way I described it to be done, which leaves me unsatisfied. If I develop, however, the knee-jerk reaction, and this is all post-training, of course, of saying, here's the end objective. I'm interested to see how you navigate the map to get us there. And in order to be successful, we have to hit these two places on the map. But I'm interested to see your proposal on how we're going to get the work done. And then build the time in to look at that proposal and say, yes, I think this is how we get there. I do that a lot in the first year of employment with people. It's not training. It's me engaging with them on how they get there. I learn a ton from them. And it is always the people who I can't follow in order to get to the results that are either super valuable to the organization or very out of step with the organization. And so sometimes we part company based on not performance of results, but the way that we try to get to certain places. It's just out of step with the organization. Okay. So it's a retention tool to respect people, to understand how they think, how they want to be perceived, how their emotions show up in their behaviors, and what their ultimate identity of themselves are. You are not going to get something out of someone when they don't hold it in their identity. You may see it, but if they don't see it, they don't have the ability to bring it out. If they do, they bring it out, and we hear so much about imposter syndrome today. They bring it out in a way that's not authentic and is very fragile.
Yeah.
So that's my first phase of retention, is to basically value my people at a great and high level. That's first phase.
Yep. No, this is super interesting. I want to recap a thing in recruiting and then come to retention with a question.
Yeah.
In the recruiting, because we had a lot of content there. I just want to say how interesting it is to the audience that those 4 C's, in the order that you recruit people: culture, then capabilities, then compensation, then commitment. 2 things really struck me. One is on the culture side, because you're hitting that up front, if somebody's not a fit, they're going to opt out before you waste a whole bunch of time on the other 3, as opposed to throwing that in at the end. I think that's super interesting.
20 to 30% of people don't come back for the capability interview.
Oh, and I'll bet you jump up and down. Like, that's great.
I'm very happy about that.
You just saved a bunch of time. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And what I say to them is, look, it's your decision to go to the second interview. I can't interview you for culture. I'm not a believer in behavioral interviewing for culture. I don't think it works, because I think the point of an interview is to get the job. So people will recast their experience in a way that fits what they think you want to hear. I'm not interested in that. So I say specifically, I'm going to tell you 4 stories of our culture. I'm going to ask if you can see yourself in those 4 stories. If you can, I think this is a place you should consider working. And the way that we consider that is to move to the next interview, but it's entirely your choice, not mine.
I love it.
And I put that on them and I say, you can't answer me from the parking lot. You have to take at least 48 hours and discuss what you and I discuss with someone whose input you value. Dad, mentor, spouse, whatever, former boss, doesn't matter. Do you see me in these stories?
Mm-hmm.
And then 30% of them feel like that is not, I don't see myself in that, and I think I'm going to get a job that I hate. And so they don't come back. It's not like they never show up again. They very gracefully sort of bow out.
Yep.
But yeah, to my point, I can't train you in culture. And so I'd much rather you self-select out of that and save you and me time, money, resources, and all of that. Yep.
Yeah. Because to your point, if now our audience popping up, I love talking to the audience, think about how many people don't cover this at all. Or maybe it's like 5 minutes of, it's like you said, it's on the wall when they walk in, but nobody ever covers it. Or if it's 5 minutes in meeting 3 or whatever. And because the job of the interview is to get it, people are good at faking. So I just love that you let them opt out and you say, hey, no harm at all.
I do at every phase of the interview system. So when we talk capabilities, I do that as well. So I say, we're going to run our assessments, of course, and then I'm going to review these assessments with you. So I don't just say, oh, you failed the test, you're gone, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I sit and very often will interview people and say, this profile says that sales is not for you or product development is not for you. This is how I'm coming to that conclusion.
Yep.
And it's my recommendation that we don't carry forward.
Yep.
And that's hard for people sometimes because they want the job. They love the culture. But if they're not the right fit, then we may not be talking about the level of job that they're there to interview for. Yeah.
But better to have, to your point, better to have a 30-minute conversation to cover now than let 30 months go by and you're deeply entangled and it never really worked and everybody wasted 1,000 hours and it feels bad at the end and all that. Yep.
And Mo, it has been so hard. You think about this. Everybody says hire slow, fire fast. Nobody does that, but everybody knows that's the right thing to do. Well, I'm over here with at least 4 hours, maybe 8 hours worth of interview time. And in the job market, that's been the case in the past 2 to 3 years. We're losing people at the second stage because they're already getting job offers and we haven't even talked comp yet.
Yeah.
So it's been difficult and we've been monkeying with it, but we know that those are the 4 pillars that we have to be comfortable with before we can get together and build a long-term career. It's not even a career for us. We're seeking those people that are called to do the activities that we do, that we know how to monetize for everybody's benefit. That's what we want. We want a bunch of missionaries that want to go out and tell the good news. I'll build the economics on the back end. And so that's where we end up with it all. So it's been tough, but the hires that we have made have been orders of magnitude better than what we had been able to get in the past.
I 100% believe it.
We're running a bigger organization after implementing this than I ran before on a third the people.
Oh, wow. I believe it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That's the measurement of quality and productivity.
Yeah, that reminds me of the old Steve Jobs quote of I'll paraphrase it, but a small team of A players will run circles around a large team of B players. And I think it even goes to like B plus. Like the marginal impact of an A plus kind of player is they'll do the work of 10 people. Like it's that, or have the impact, have the impact of 10 people.
And once you know that as the leader or the CEO, it's humbling. So we run back immediately to retention, right? So if I've got A players, maybe I'm an A player, but am I really an A player in everything that I touch? Am I really? No, of course I'm not. There are things that I do very well that I do better than anybody else in my organization. They would tell you that. They bring me in on those kinds of calls and opportunities all the time. I'm very good at pulling the airplane up right before it crashes nose down. And so they bring me into those conversations with clients and that kind of stuff. But they don't love the way that I do product development on the whiteboard. They think it's very inefficient and they're not wrong. I'm not saying that they're wrong at all. And so I don't typically get invited to that as much in the early stages as I do in the, hey, we need to make decisions between point A and point B. So me respecting that and not crowding in and not feeling weak or scared that my team is high powered and they're meeting with each other and I'm not in every conversation. That's totally fine with me. The CEO's job is not to do everything in the organization. It's to build an organization where everything is done.
Yep.
And so we talked then about retention. The second part of retention is if I recognize I have a great team, what am I doing to acknowledge that? Simply to acknowledge it. Well, I change the way that I manage them. That's the best way. But secondly, how do I celebrate that? If it's worth being celebrated, how do I celebrate it?
Yeah.
And so I'm a huge fan of writing thank you cards and that sort of thing. But there's way more to it than that. Love languages is a very good thing to use in your marriage and your parenting and all of that kind of stuff. Why can't we use it at work? Each of my team has a love language. I have a guy that he doesn't want to be thanked or praised in public, but he definitely loves a night out with steak and bourbon and a little bit of wine and that sort of thing. That's his love language, is that act of service that I can bring back to him as a reward for work well done. I have other people that even if they haven't done good work, need to be told that they're doing good work or capable of doing so. So you have to really focus in on the team as individuals. And this feels squishy. This feels what HR tells us not to do. But I love the phrase that love is a verb. It's what you do. And so you have to love on your people in an active manner where they are able to perceive from their own place the understanding that this is an act of love. This is an act of appreciation. It's an acknowledgement of value. So we're doing that in our cultural renditions every week to say, oh, I saw that you did this really well last week, and I want to say that in front of everybody. That's great. We're doing it by gifting in the right way for those that's important to as well. And then I'm writing, I think the first year that I adopted this, I did over 500 pieces of handwritten material. Thanks for this, thanks for this, thanks for this. I ran out of people to write to. And so this feels like genius, but genius comes from when you're out of other ideas. I started writing the families of my people.
Wow.
We had a guy win a prestigious industry award. His kids were 13 and 12, 11 and 13. What do they know about prestigious industry awards? They know what I told them about it. That's what they know. It was my job as the leader to put in context for them the upshot of the excellence that their father had put into his career, which sometimes cost them time of him being at a baseball game or being home early, not stressed out over dinner, and those sacrifices. And I wanted those kids to know that we recognized it, and I wanted them to understand it in the right context. That family moved 2 years ago. They picked up and moved to a different house. I helped them, not lifting furniture and stuff, but helped them find the houses and stuff. And the guy, my employee, sent me a screenshot of the letter that I had written his son, who was 13 at the time and is about 17, 18 now. It was taped on the wall next to his bed above his alarm clock. You think that guy leaves me for 50 cents an hour or a different career opportunity or money or anything as crass as that? Not at all. He knows that he works for somebody that appreciates him. He knows that he works for an organization that appreciates him. And he knows that he works in a place where he has the creative ability to do his best work, backed up by a team that appreciates where he goes.
Yeah.
That's what we have to do. And you only can do that by building the habit around the activity. Yeah. Write the cards.
I love it. And gosh, one of the things that will get pushback sometimes in our Grow Big training, or especially our Grow Big leader training, we're teaching leaders how to develop a strategy and implement, is this idea of celebration. Even the word itself, sometimes people can have resistance. Well, it's not my job. It's what we pay them to do. I shouldn't have to. You've probably heard it a million times too. And we'd start to do exercise around, well, what could you do? What would think with empathy on your team? What would they appreciate? And to your point, you gave some great examples of some things. Sometimes people want public praise. Sometimes they want a private note. But making this a habit is one of the most powerful ways we've seen elevate the impact a team has. And Trey, it's other than your time. I think you'd agree. It's 100% free.
It is largely free. Yeah, it absolutely is. So I take the 5 love languages. I have a form that is a thought-provoking form more than anything else that I keep on my desk. And it has all of my direct reports and all of their direct reports. and it has the love languages as a list on the side. And as I'm reviewing every single morning, I sit down and say, what did I do with the culture today? What did I do with my people today? And what did I do with my numbers today? And I have to fill that out to feel complete for the week. Like I have to touch those
I
three
like that
things
a
every
lot.
single day. I'm not allowed to open, I don't allow myself to open my inbox, check my text messages, see who did what on Facebook. None of that stuff until those three things are noted, that these are the three things that I've done this morning, right? I do that every single day. Well, sometimes I don't know the answer. This new person that we've hired, that I struggled with this on Tuesday, I don't know her well enough to know what her love language is or any of that. So I did all of them. I sent her a gift.
I love it.
I praised her in public, right? I called her up and said, is there anything we can be doing for you as an act of service? Like, is there anything you need help doing? I mean, we went right down the list of all of them. Oh, quality time is the other one. I took her to lunch, of course. We do that and, bring people into the organization. And then we do it again when they've been there 90 days. So I took her to her 90-day lunch the other day. She doesn't know that that's something that we do. And I said, you've been in my business for 90 days now. Tell me something about my business that I don't know. And she had some insights. They were good, So I tried to just carpet bomb her with saying I love you in 5 different ways without ever having to say I love you. We're sending her to Gary Keller's personal mastermind training this week for young people. Her boyfriend is going to be left in town. I sent him a note saying we're so proud of her for being accepted into this program. We're paying for it. We're investing in her and all that kind of stuff. I'm having drinks with him tonight at 6:00, just so that he's not sort of on his own this week. That's the way that you take care of people. And when they get those job offers and when they start saying, I'm not fulfilled in the work or the role and that sort of thing, those are the things that get them coming back to you in conversation.
Yep.
I would much rather somebody come to me and say, look, I love being here. I don't feel challenged in my work, or I think I'm underpaid. I think other people would pay me more. Those kinds of things. Can we talk about those things before I go? That's a much more adult and productive way of building loyalty in a system.
Yeah. Let's let people and go to numbers, because I know we've got a time issue too. But I just have to say this to the audience: rewind what Trey just taught us. Like, go back and listen to it again, because if you happen to be somebody watching or listening that's had a little bit of resistance around celebrating others, the impact they're having, how we can be helpful to them, things like that, I'm convinced this is one of the number one things we can do as leaders. A lot of people resist it, and Trey just gave a masterclass on how to do it. So
I appreciate that, man. Let me credit that where it comes from. That was my old 84-year-old grandmother told me, if you don't show your girl how much you love her, somebody else will. And I use that for my people as well. I don't want anybody, if they leave the organization or not, that's fine. I don't want them leaving knowing that I don't love them.
Brilliant close to that. So, as a former actuary and somebody who loves people, I love the people side, but I love numbers too. So let's get into it. What should a CEO do?
So the first objection that I always get is the CEO says, that's the CFO's job. Numbers are not my job, right? It is not true. I'm not saying that the CEO has to be the one running the reports and rationalizing and figuring out, how to close the books at the end of the month and those kinds of things. No, those are subject matter tasks that should be handled by subject matter experts. No problem there. But the CEO's job is to convert the real results into numbers that the team can understand, contextualize, and reach for. So it's our job to set the agenda around what numbers should be. So every year, I start off the year with a management retreat and a goal setting session. And we set the corporate goals in consultation with each other of what we think we're going to achieve and what we should be working on this year. We use that largely as the resource allocation meter for the business, right? And then we set numeric hard number goals based on that. We then go through a goal setting process face to face with every single person that works in any of our companies. Okay. So we sit and we talk about what your number goals are going to be. We don't assign quotas and don't believe in them. What are your numbers going to be? How are you going to be a better version of yourself? We don't give you that. We just want you to tell us that. How are you going to be a better version of your business self. What business skills do you want to acquire? What habits do you want to pick up? Those kinds of things. And then how are you going to be the best version of yourself in your family? And how is your family going to do that themselves as well? And so a lot of that, we talk about this in our first interview, the cultural interview, a lot of that's a bit invasive. Well, what business is it of yours? What goal my 6-year-old is going to set this year or something of that nature? But what we have found is that the people that want to share themselves in holistic fashion, in goals, are going to be the ones that stay with us the longest and are the most fulfilled by what we can do. I extrapolate from all of that what our soft number goals are going to be. And we have one soft number goal, which is a PGI, personal growth initiative. Of all the stuff you just told me, what is your personal growth initiative? And we aim to have 100% satisfaction score on that by the end of the year. In other words, every single person takes an activity that is going to change, deepen, or broaden their identity. Maybe this year that's a family situation. Maybe it's a business situation. Maybe it's a personal situation. Doesn't matter. But what is your personal growth initiative that no matter what, you won't fail to execute this year?
And so just one. Yeah.
We take one from everyone. We fully expect you to do everything that you put in your goal book. Goals for us are those things which are not achieved. So you absolutely should. I don't believe in the concept of stretch goals and those kinds of things. And I have found that people don't tend to stop once they cross the finish line. So if you hit your goals in October, it's not like you go veg out for 4 months.
Yep.
Most likely people typically they'll go up a level in their goals and start working at a higher Maslow level, which is excellent.
Yep.
Yeah. So we set the hard numbers and then we set the soft numbers. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the hard number, to make sure I got this right, the hard numbers are more like growth of the business, dollars, revenue,
What's
sales,
my top
things
line
like
revenue?
Yeah.
How many accounts does that equal? We always have a recruiting goal in our businesses. So how many new people are we going to hire?
Yep.
And so you see what happens there is if I'm going to hire 4 people this year and we only hire internal referrals, that's it. Then I need my team encouraged enough that they think this is a good place to work. And if that's the case, if 10 of you give me 5 referrals apiece, I should be able to hire 2 to 4 of those people. And if that's the case, now you have a goal of making 5 referrals throughout the year. That's how we back those things down. Revenue, the same way, right? We look at that and say, hey, to hit the goals that we need to do a $4 million a year, whatever the number happens to be, for us to make payroll, for us to support our product development efforts, for us to do all the things that we think about CFO wise. We need revenue of that nature. How much of that can I sign you up for? And people will say, yeah, my number was going to be $500,000 at Rev or something like that. And then I have people that say, I'm not a Rev generator, right? So I have to have a different goal for them. And we break our company up into different groups, as all companies do.
Yep.
So the goals can be different.
Yep.
The hard numbers can be different based on who we're talking to, of course.
Yeah, I love a couple things about this because there's so many times goal setting and metrics success play into our Grow Big training and our Grow Big Leader training. So talking to the audience as much as you, Trey. And one of the things that I think is critical that you've covered here, I want the audience to really let this sink in, is a lot of times people will create the hard goals. I want to bring in so much business in the next year. I want to be involved in so many cases, matters, projects, ancillary products sold, whatever. And that's where they stop if they do anything. And man, you got to back it up to the soft goals of activity, things that I think some of the best goals sometimes are a little squishy. And you can always have a number that goes around it. Well, I want to get better at this skill. Well, you've come up with a satisfaction score. You can measure somebody's just personal reflection on where am I at now and where do I want to be in a year? And you can measure that. But having the number drives clarity. Yeah. Your thoughts on that?
Yes. So we have to set the number and then we have to share it transparently. So it isn't enough to just set the goal. And we set a top line and a bottom line number every year. That means that every person on my team knows what my bottom line is every single year.
Yep.
frankly, every quarter, because we have goal review at that on corporate goals every quarter. So
Yep.
they know specifically, did we make $1 million this quarter? And if we did, my team also knows how we spend money, because the first time I ever talked to them about it, I said, how much money do you think we make? And the numbers were insane, from no money to $10 million on a company that was doing 2 in rev total, And I said, okay, well, here's how much we make. How much of that do you think I take home? And we had numbers from 5% to 100%. So it was instructive to me that people didn't understand economics, hadn't been educated.
Yep.
So we went through an entire year process of the ownership thinking model, Brad Ham's book, Ownership Thinking, where I brought them in and showed them, this is what margin means. This is what EBITDA means. They all speak in those terms now. Mo, before that, my sales team would come to me and say, I need you to spend $100,000 in marketing. And I say, okay, how much are we going to close? We're going to close $100,000. It won't cost you anything. And I don't know about your business. I'm sure it's a very healthy business, but I've never seen 100% margin business. But they didn't understand that. Now they come back with sophisticated models where they say, we think we can close this much and this much and this much, and at a revenue of this, and they know how to do the math now. And they don't ask me for stupid things. Yeah. Last point on that, because I'm transparent on my numbers and where we are in the boat together. In 2009, when the world went to absolute uncertain hell, I went to my team and said, I need $200,000 back from the business. We need to put ourselves on survival footing. And it's going to take an extra $200,000 for the specific business I was talking to at that point. I said, here's note cards. Throw your suggestions into the box and let's figure this out. And anybody that gives me a suggestion that we take, I will give you 50% of the savings. That's the ownership thinking model. They came up with $500,000 of savings, including Trey should not fly first class anymore. And they weren't wrong. I didn't like that. I didn't want to vote for that one, but they weren't wrong on that. And so I downgraded my flying and that sort of thing so that we could survive into the future in something we didn't know was going to be certain or not certain. The other thing that happened is the youngest girl in the room, she was our receptionist at the time, she said, well, what if we sold more? My mom runs the decision maker for this entity over here. Let me call her. She called her and said, hey, I need to pick up $200,000 for the business. She opened that account for us at 18, opened that account for us. And it remains one of the largest accounts that we've had for that was probably, that was 13 years ago. So she helped fill that gap by doing that as well. So when you ask the question and give them the context and are transparent about what the real numbers mean, then your team will be very creative and very conscientious with what they ask you for.
I love it. And you get such a broad base of ideas, savings, making money, cutting money. So, down in the show notes, I'll go find that ownership thinking book. Who was the author again?
Brad Ham. He had a co-author as well. I knew Brad personally, and his material is phenomenal. He's not with us anymore, but his material is phenomenal. He had a consulting agreement, Mo, you'll know this because you and I live in the same state, with the carpet manufacturers in Dalton.
Sure.
And he went in and was working with them for efficiency improvement. And he went and started talking to this guy who was sort of running the head of the line of whatever they were doing. The guy had been there since the 60s. And from 12 to 1 every day, or from 3 to 4 every day or something, they shut the line down to let it cool. And Brad was talking to him and said, well, what do you think we should do and all that? And said, well, we don't have to shut this machine down every day. We had to shut the machine in the 60s down every day for an hour to let it cool. But this thing's water cooled. It doesn't have to. Well, why do you still do it? I don't know. I've been wondering the same thing for 10 years, but nobody ever told me to change it. So we didn't. He picked up an hour of productive mill processing, whatever that machine did, making carpet a day.
Wow. 300
days a year. He picked up 300 hours, and each of those hours was $50,000 in profit or some insane number like that.
Yeah.
Not one middle manager, senior manager, anybody had ever wandered over to the dude running the machine to ask him, how could we do this better?
Yeah.
And my guess, they have 10 things to tell you. Yeah.
Yeah. And if they would have had the ownership thinking, they would have. So sounds like a great book. We'll put that down in the show notes. one last thing, and we'll close things out, is I want to say this to the audience, your insight around setting the goals in a way that are 100% achievable, super important. There's a study by a researcher, I think he's at Virginia, Seppo Isohola, and he's written a study with some others on psychological momentum. And completely paraphrased, it says that one, psychological momentum is true. The feeling of a sports team being on a run, the feeling like you're unstoppable, or the feeling like you're defeated. I'm just going to give up. This is a true thing in the human mind. So thing one, it's a thing. Yep. Psychological momentum, it is a thing. Thing two is one of the things they said that we can do as humans to create positive psychological momentum is set initial goals so low we can step over them. And I'm completely paraphrasing, that's our way of saying it. But generally speaking, set that initial bar or the soft goal, whatever it is, the first month, what you want to accomplish this year, whatever, make it so that it's 100% achievable. And your insight, Trey, I think is spot on, which is once somebody gets there, they don't stop. They keep going. But if you set the goal too high, they get halfway through there, like, oh, I did the math, I can't get there. I'm just going to dial the rest of this year in. I'm not going to tell anybody that. But setting the goal too hard can actually be harmful to psychological momentum.
It can. And if somebody cannot see with certainty and clarity that they can achieve the goal, we know psychologically that we know from talking to ourselves and being honest with ourselves that we do not invest all of us in achieving something that can't be achieved.
Yes.
So it is much better. I don't set quotas. I told you that a minute ago. I go to my people and say, how much are you signing up for this year? Yep. That you are going to hit no matter what. That means if you lose your largest case, that means what are you signing up for? Because I'll run the business on that number. Because if you tell me you're going to hit it, I know you're going to hit it. Yep. Not once do they hit it and stop working. They all go forward with that every single time. And so I don't believe in this concept of stretch goals. I said that as well, because to your point, they lack clarity. And so they lack conviction. And people only invest in what they're convicted can be happening.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting. Trey, this has been awesome. I've just had so much fun. Could talk to you forever. How should people reach out to you? Obviously, I would highly recommend this book, everybody, Product Placement. A CEO only does three things, because everything and more is in here. But how else can they reach out to you, Trey? I know you do a lot of consulting. You do a ton of speaking on this topic. I mean, there's a lot to do. Yeah.
I do, and I'm looking for speaking engagements all the time. I love to be able to take this message out, and it's a fun enough message because if you get your boss in the room, you know I'm going to beat up on him a little bit, and that's fun for people. So a couple of things. One, I run a newsletter that just sort of has my thoughts. I write it. It's not AI. It's not a team. It's just my thoughts on various stuff. Right now, I'm on an AI kick, but yesterday I wrote about what an Italian nun taught me in 2011. So it's just a little visit. Every whenever I feel like it. So it doesn't come out every Tuesday and Thursday. It comes out when I have something to say. You can get that newsletter, plantyourflag.live. And it's just a Substack newsletter. You can sign up for it, and then it's not paid, it's free. And you can sign up for that. And we've got, 10 or 11,000 people that read that. And we get good open rates and that sort of thing. So that's one place. My personal website is trey-taylor.com. That's trey-taylor.com. My consulting company is trinity-blue.com. The book has its own website, a CEO only does three things.com. And of course, you can buy that on Amazon. And Mo, I might as well give you the exclusive scoop. The publisher came back to me about 6 months ago and said, you've done the book, you've done the audio book, you're 50 times more successful in sales than we thought you would be. So you need to do a workbook to go alongside this. I thought that was a really good idea. So we have published that effectively yesterday, and it's called The Companion Guide to a CEO Only Does Three Things. And it's got these things about, how do you capture the values? I give assignments for people to write it down. It's just a good companion as you're reading the book to actually take the time and do the work as well. So that is now out and ready for public consumption.
Where's that? Where do people get that, Trey? Do they get that on Amazon or
Amazon.
A website?
Yep, Amazon as well. We publish it to Amazon, and then I'm working with Amazon. They'll sell the bundle together, so I'm trying to figure out how to do that.
I love it
as well. Yep. So that's something that we had been asked for quite a bit, and people had asked for a video course and that sort of thing. But I really like the idea of this sort of self-study. Maybe we'll do the other later, but I like the idea of that self-study.
Yeah, no, I do too. And a sort of a paint by numbers approach of here's exactly how you want to implement the system. That's what we do. And 30,000 people have gone through our courses. It really helps to give people job aids and worksheets to implement content. And I think it's going to be a big success. Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, audience members, so we'll put all of those things down in the show notes so that you can just click on links, go straight to the thing. High recommend on the book. And I haven't seen the workbook, but I have a feeling Trey's bar is really high around excellence. So I have no doubt it's going to be great. And then we'll put the Iso Ahola study down in the show notes, the Brad Ham book, all the stuff that we talked about, we'll put down there too. So go down to the show notes to get the good stuff. But if you do one thing, buy the book, and I'll give it the second thing, sign up for the newsletter. So how about that, Trey?
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah. Mo, can I tell you a story on the way out?
Do it.
Okay. I have an algebra teacher when I was in 6th or 7th grade, whenever you learn algebra. Her name was Mrs. Madeline Brownlee. She was very tall, and she was made taller by the fact that she was still wearing beehives when I was a kid in the 80s. She wore polyester suits that you could shoot bullets at and they wouldn't make it through. There's thick polyester pantsuits. And she always had this like brooch with a beetle or a bee or a butterfly or something on her shoulder. She was tough as nails. And she came in one day and said, Mr. Taylor, you are the homework monitor for the class, which is really what every 13-year-old kid really wants to do, is to narc on his buddies, right? And so I did that job and I hated it. And one Friday afternoon, if you didn't do your homework, then you got study hall that Friday afternoon. And we were a basketball school, and our little JV middle school team was playing in some important game that Friday. And because I marked off the star jump shot guy, he did not get to play, and I had to go to study hall with him as we didn't get to play basketball that day. And you can imagine how kind and understanding he and his teammates were towards me on that, to the extent that Monday morning I went to Mrs. Brownlee's office and I said, I don't want this job. I never asked for it in the first place. It's not important. I want out. I quit. And she pulled out the paper from the previous week and she said, Mr. Taylor, you marked yourself as not having done the homework last week. Why is that? And I said, because I didn't do the homework. And she said, right and wrong matter, Mr. Taylor. Right and wrong matter. And she had done that thing where she pulled her glasses down like middle school teachers will do. And then she put it back and began to ignore me. So I didn't get to quit. But what she did for me, immediately I felt as if I was rooted to the ground. She told me about me in a way that I didn't know was possible, because I knew what was right and wrong. And not every kid at that age does or did at that point. She knew something about me. And from that point on, I trusted Mrs. Brownlee. I was completely unbothered when somebody complained about being punished for the task that they didn't complete, completely immune to it, and today. She was walking down the hall one day and had a new kid and said, Mr. Taylor, come over here. This is Todd Cannon. I want you to be his best friend and show him around the school forever. Todd Cannon is my best friend to this day. Another time I was walking down, I should have learned not to walk down the hall. There was a student council sign-up form on the wall. Why isn't your name on that, Mr. Taylor? I don't want that job. Put your name on that list. So I did. I do politics to this day. The governor of Georgia, who you know, Mo, is a friend of mine, announced his campaign from my living room because Ms. Brownlee said, go find the right people and make it happen. So what did she do that made her different than every other teacher that I ever had in the entire economic or education space my whole career? She did two things. And these two things, every single leader, person, CEO, all of us can do and should start today. Number one, she precepted a gift in me that I didn't know I had in me. Preception. She conceived of it. She could see it before I could see it in myself. That is not enough. You and I look at people in our world all the time and see this person is good at this or this person is good at that. She took it a step further and she evoked it from me. That's from the Latin ex voca, to call from within. She saw that gift in me. She called it out of me and showed it to me. And then that gift became a part of my identity. I can't not do the things that she showed me because it is who I am. And the greatest gift and privilege that we are given when we lead other people is the ability to shape their identity, their belief in who they are. That's something we can start today. We should start today by finding somebody in our orbit. And I don't care if it's the girl at Subway sandwiches. I don't care if it's the guy at the car wash. I don't care if it's your VP of product. It doesn't matter. You go tell them, this is a gift that I see in you, that I appreciate, and I want you to know that I know that about you. And you will have just changed that person's identity and picture of himself, herself for the rest of their lives. Nobody gets to do that until they consciously make the decision to do that. And so the challenge that I lay down to anybody that would hear this in my voice is that you have an obligation now to go and precept gifts and evoke those gifts out of people by appreciating them.
Trey, mic drop.
Good.
I have no comments. I have no summary. I have nothing. I just want to say that you had me at every word in the entire interview. You've really worked hard at just becoming an incredible speaker. And that was the perfect story for the ending. I absolutely loved it. Thank you for being on the show. Audience, listen to this one again. I know I'm going to listen to this one more than once because it was really that valuable. Thanks, Trey.
Thanks, Mo. I'm glad you said that, and I appreciate your giving me the platform and doing the work you're doing for people as well. Thanks so much.
Awesome.